let's dive right into it. So, what do I feel like talking about in this video? In this video, I want to talk about how our... Yep, the gate is opening. I want to talk about how our minds make everything in life into a bigger deal than it actually is. That's first and foremost. Secondly, what I want to talk about is the transient nature of everything. Whenever I find myself in a state of overwhelm, I do the best that I can, and I'm not always perfect with this, but I do the best that I can to remind myself of the transient nature of whatever it is that I'm going through, right? And it's really important to remember that, because everything is temporary. Even you and I, we're not going to be here someday. Now, that's not to say that our experiences of this life aren't a big deal or don't really matter, because that's not true. They do. They matter a lot. But I think that a lot of people have a tendency to get caught up in the overwhelm of their life and what's happening and, all this, that, and the other. And it's very interesting the perspective you get when you take a step back and look at life, right? Take that step back and just look at everything, and you'll just be like, oh, okay, all right. And when you can allow yourself to have that perspective, you open yourself up to the potential of just profound relaxation. And that's very important. Think about it this way. Ask yourself, do you like stress? Do you like being overwhelmed? Now, here's something interesting. Because I can ask you if you like stress or like being overwhelmed, right? But here's the interesting thing. If you grew up in an environment where there was constant stress, where there was constant overwhelm, right? You, based on trauma responses, you're actually more likely to seek out those types of environments, those types of situations. You're likely to seek that stuff out because that's what you're comfortable with. That's what you're familiar with. There's the idea, right, that relationship-wise, right? There's the idea that, all right, say for instance, somebody who grew up in an environment where everything was chaos, right? They learned love in chaos. So therefore, if they're in a relationship with someone and it's just totally peaceful, that can come off as boring for them, right? So the reason why I'm saying this is because a lot of people, based on their traumatic pasts, they seek out relationships, they seek out situations and events that make them feel comfortable, make them feel familiar, right? But that comfort, that familiarity stems from the trauma, and that trauma is the being raised in an environment of chaos, so therefore you have to match that energy, right? So it's not just a matter of recognizing okay, you have overwhelm in your life, right? That overwhelm is temporary. It's not just about recognizing that, but it's also about looking at yourself, looking at your past, looking at your trauma, and diving into it and being like, oh, wow. So, the reason that I find myself in all these situations, that I find myself in all these positions, all these different things. The very reason that my life looks the way that it does is because I grew up in that environment, and therefore I've been very specifically molded and conditioned into this type of person that seeks out these relationships and these situations and these things. Again, for somebody who was raised in chaos, peace looks boring. In fact, um, the interesting thing about this whole thing of being raised in chaos is a fly around me, chaotic fly. The interesting thing about being raised in chaos is that like people will actually leave. Not only will people leave relationships because there's no chaos, because chaos is what they're used to and that's not what they're getting, but they will also do things to create chaos. They will do things to create drama and all that stuff. For a lot of people, peace is very boring. And I just find that to be very interesting. I find that to be very, very interesting. Peace is boring for a lot of people. And it's interesting because, like, looking at my own life, not to get into any logistics because I choose what I share here and boundaries, but I look at my own specific patterns and stuff and the way that I've carried things out, the way that I've approached people, things, relationships, all that stuff. I look at all that stuff and I see my life changing in very profound ways. I I have standards now that I've never had before. Boundaries, of course. And it's just very interesting that when you set those boundaries, when you set those standards, what happens, right? You're going to lose people. You're going to, things are going to change in your life. When you change your energy, when you change what you prioritize in your relationships, in your life, when you change all of that stuff, everything in your life changes. You change, the people change, the very reason why you are in a relationship, whether it's a friend or a partner, with the person you are, is because your energy is a very specific way. You might be in a relationship with someone who has either loose or is entirely boundaryless, right? You might be in a relationship with someone like that, right?